Hey, what's good, Econ fam? Mr. DeWitt back with another EU instructional strategies breakdown. Today we're going to be talking about the difference between change in demand versus change in quantity demanded, as well as and focusing more so on the shifters or the determinants of demand. Econ is supposed to be hard? Psh, why let it be? Follow me, let's get it. All right, class. So today, once again, we are talking about demand, right? So just a quick review of what we should already know about demand. We should know how to properly set up the graph to graph a demand curve. We should know to correctly label our demand curve with a capital D. We should know where price belongs. We should know where quantity demanded belongs. So with that being said, let's test your knowledge. This is an activity strategy, so let's go ahead and go through this. It says correctly set up, label, and graph the demand curve for orange juice by using the demand schedule below. So I'm going to pause the video and you are going to draw your L-shaped graph and you're going to set your graph up properly with your demand curve plotted correctly. All right, so I'm going to pause and continue. All right, so let's go ahead and go through this to see if you correctly labeled. All right, so the first thing, price is on the y-axis, located on the y-axis as shown. Quantity demanded is located on the x-axis. Now, I chose to label my y-axis, the price axis, by 50-cent increments. So 50 cents, $1, $1.50, and $2. Now I did this because of how it so nicely correlated with the prices that were given to me, right? So just like I stated before, there's no right or wrong way to correctly label your graph in terms of what increments to use, but a rule of thumb is the lower increments you use, the more clear your graph will be whenever you finish graphing your demand curve. All right, so on the y-axis, we are finished on price axis. On your quantity demanded axis, your x-axis, I simply labeled it 1, 2, and 3, right? Now, all we have to do now is correctly plot our points. So when the price is $2, quantity demanded is 0. When the price is $1.50, the quantity demanded is 1. When the price is $1, the quantity demanded is 2. And when the price is 50 cents, quantity demanded is 3. So all that's left to do is to connect the dots, and don't forget to label your graph. After you graph your demand curve, you have to label your demand curve with a capital D, right? Demand always slopes down. All right, so today we're going to talk about something new. So we have our demand curve graph. This is the same one as you saw on the other slide, right? So now this is going to relate to something other than price, right? Let me give you the scenario. So now let's assume most Americans living in the United States have received an increase in income. What does that mean? That means Americans are making more money, right? So how will this affect the demand curve for orange juice? Now notice, I didn't say that the price of orange juice changed, but what changed is the Americans' income, the amount of money that Americans make. They are making more money. So this is going to have a direct impact on our demand for orange juice. Now, instead of the price of orange juice being $2 and 0 being demanded, now there's going to be 1 demanded at the price of $2. Instead of 1 being demanded, quantity demanded of 1 at $1.50, there's now going to be 2, quantity demanded of 2 at that price. When the price of orange juice is $1, instead of having 2 cartons of orange juice being demanded, now we have 3. People want 3. Whenever the price is 50 cents, 3 used to be the number that people wanted, but now people make more income, so they're going to demand 4. So the quantity demanded will shift or change to 4. Once we have our points plotted, draw your curve, and don't forget to label your demand curve. The original demand curve was represented by the letter capital D. This is a change. Whenever you draw a second curve, you're going to label that D1, or sometimes you might even see D2. Now, the reason for this is to identify which curve came first. And of course, D came before D1, right? So the curve that we just mapped out and we graphed, we're going to label that D1. Now, another thing you need to know about this. After you draw your curve and correctly label your curve, look at that arrow. You're going to have an arrow showing or pointing to the new arrow, showing the direction that the change occurred. In this case, it shifted to the right. Now, let's stop for a minute. This is my tip of the day. Please pay close attention to this. Just like a number line, whenever we are talking about a shift to the right, if increase happens, curve always shifts to the right. If decrease happens, the curve always shifts to the left, always. So once again, increase to the right, decrease to the left. Let's look at what happened here. So Americans, they had an increase in income. That means they made more money. So therefore their demand curve increased. It shifted to the right. All right, so now we're ready to talk about the shifters of demand, right? The first shifter, and this is the one we talked about on the previous slide, is income. Second shifter is consumer taste and preferences. Sometimes you'll see popularity, which basically that's what they're talking about, how popular the item is. The more popular it is, increases demand. When it becomes less popular, demand decreases. Third shifter is related goods. You need to put a star next to number 3, related goods, because this is the one students struggle with a little bit. It's broken down into 2 subcategories, the first of which is complementary goods, and the second one is substitute goods, which we'll elaborate on both of those. The fourth determinant or shifter is future expectations of consumers, and that's broken down into 3 categories as well. So this is another one that tricks students up if you let it. So future expectations of income, future expectations of available goods and services, future expectations of price of goods. So that means that when the good or service that we want, if it's going to be cheaper in the future, that's going to impact our demand for that good today. And the last shifter that we're going to talk about is population. Pretty simple. The more populated an area is, it's going to increase demand because there's more people that want stuff. The less populated an area is, it's going to decrease demand because there's less people, there's less demand for goods and services. So we'll talk about all of these. You have to memorize these. These are the 5 shifters of demand. All right, so income. When an individual's income increases, when they make more money, their demand for a good or service will increase. So this is one we just did, so this should be relatively easy. Now remember, same concept, price y-axis, quantity demanded x-axis. We have our curve that's sloping downward, so it's a demand curve represented by the letter D, and it shifted to the right. Remember, right is always increase. Right, always increase. So D to D1, it was a rightward shift, and what caused this to happen? An increase in income. Now, when an individual's income decreases, they make less money. What's going to happen? Since they make less money, that's going to cause the demand curve to shift to the left. It's going to cause a decrease in demand. So therefore, you see the demand curve D shifting to the left, and our new demand curve D1 to the left of the original demand curve. And this was caused by a decrease in income. All right, so simply put, when people make more money, they demand more stuff. Curve shifts right. When they make less money, they demand less stuff. Curve shifts left. It's as simple as that. All right, so number 2, consumer taste and preferences or popularity. So as a good or service becomes more popular, consumers will purchase more of that good or service, causing the demand curve to increase and the demand curve to shift to the right. So you have earbuds, presumably these are your AirPods, right? So pretty popular item with students. So the demand curve is going to shift to the right. More people are going to demand this good based on consumer taste and preferences. They're popular right now, right? So what's going to happen? Just like I said, demand curve shifts to the right. Next item. I hope you know what this is, but a lot of you might not know what this is. This is what we call a Walkman. This is very old. This is like late 80s, early 90s, all right? So as a good or service becomes less popular, consumers will purchase less of that good or service, causing demand to decrease and the demand curve to shift to the left. So in this case, for the Sony Walkman that you see, what's going to happen to our demand curve? How many of you were just scratching and itching to go out and buy a Sony Walkman? Oh, nobody, right? So therefore, the demand for a Sony Walkman is going to decrease, shifting the demand curve to the left. All right, so simply put, when an item becomes more popular with consumers, the demand increases, it shifts to the right. When it becomes less popular with consumers, the demand decreases, it shifts to the left. All right, so the third shifter, related goods or complements. Well, we're going to talk about complements first. Complements are goods that are used in conjunction with one another. So simply put, they go together. Peanut butter, jelly, milk, cereal, razors, shaving cream, shoes, socks, shoelaces, shoes. You get the gist of it. Now, notice we have a demand curve, right? Price, quantity demanded, located in the appropriate places. Demand curve shifts downward. And this is for, let's see here, let's read our scenario. If the demand curve is depicting cereal and the price of milk skyrockets. So this demand curve is for the item of cereal, right? So if the demand curve is depicting cereal, which it is, and the price of milk skyrockets, that occurrence will impact the demand for cereal. How? So what's happening here? First and foremost, this is my second tip of the day. Now, remember this. When you read a scenario and you see 2 items listed, in this case, you see milk and you see cereal, 2 different items. Whenever you see 2 items in the same scenario, ask yourself, why are they putting 2 items in this scenario? How are these items related? And this should be easier for you to remember because they are complements of one another. Milk and cereal go together, right? So remember, the demand curve is for cereal. Now, when the price of milk skyrockets, what does that mean? Are more or less people buying milk? Less people are going to be buying milk, right? So that means if less people are buying milk, less people are also buying cereal because they are complementary goods. So in that case, what's going to happen to our demand curve? Is going to shift to the left. So demand for cereal is going to decrease because the price of milk increased. Less people are buying milk, which means less people are going to buy cereal, right? All right, so substitutes. This is the second part of related goods. Substitutes. A substitute or substitutes are goods that can be used in place of one another. So margarine can be used in the place of butter, right? Ponchos can be used in place of umbrellas. Ride-share services can replace public transportation, right? Those are all things that are substitutes or examples of substitutes. All right, so once again, price, quantity demanded in the proper area. It's a demand curve because it slopes downward, and plus it has the letter D representing the curve. So we're ready to go. Let's look at our scenario. All right, so let's suppose the demand curve on the left represents the demand for public transportation. So the demand curve is for public transportation. What would happen to the demand for public transportation if the price of rideshare fares doubled? Now, what did I say for my tip of the day? Whenever there's two items mentioned, ask yourself, how are those two items related? Now, public transportation, rideshare. So rideshare, we're talking about things like Uber and Lyft, right? So they don't go together, but those can be substituted for each other, right? You can either take public transportation or you can take Uber. So therefore, let's look at our scenario once more. What would happen to the demand for public transportation if the price of rideshare fares doubled? So the price of Uber and Lyft is doubled. So ask yourself, if more or less people going to take Uber? If Uber's prices go up, less people are going to take Uber. So how does that affect the demand curve for public transportation? You guessed it, more people are going to take public transportation because the price of Uber doubled. So that means that our demand curve should shift to the right, which it did. So once again, increase in demand, curve shifts right, decrease in demand, curve shifts left. All right, so simply put, when the price of a good increases, the demand for its substitute increases. That's the rule for substitutes. Students always miss this one. Make sure you put a star next to this particular example. All right, so future expectations of income. Let's suppose the demand curve are for the shoes to the right, which they look like Jordans, right? Pretty nice looking pair of Jordans there. Suppose my boss tells me today that I will be getting an increase in pay beginning next month. I'm not getting increase in pay today, but I know that next month I'm going to have more money in my pocket, all right? So what's going to happen to my demand for items now, knowing I'm going to make more money in the future? Is my demand curve going to increase or decrease? Let's see. So the demand curve will increase. So it's going to shift to the right? And this is because I'm expecting to have more money, to come into more money at a later date in the near future, right? All right, so future expectations of price. Suppose the demand curve to the right still represents the same shoes, the Jordans, right? What if the retail store puts out an advertisement stating that shoes will be discounted by half price in 3 weeks' time? Let's stop right there. So if a store puts out an advertisement saying that the price of shoes is going to be cut in half by 50% in 3 weeks. So we want to buy shoes. Do I want to get them now whenever they're $100, or do I want to get them 3 weeks from now when they're $50? Which one would you want to do? Me personally, I would wait 3 weeks from now. But if I'm waiting 3 weeks from now to buy these shoes, what's happening to the demand for those shoes right now? You guessed it, the demand is decreasing. So therefore the curve shifts to the left because everybody's waiting for the shoes to go on sale, right? See, not that hard. Not that hard. This stuff is kind of common sense if you allow it to be. You just have to think through it a little bit. All right, so future expectations of availability of goods. Imagine that the demand curve shown on the left is for bottled water. So what would happen to the demand for bottled water if a hurricane was on path to impact Georgia in 4 days? Think about this. What would happen to the demand for bottled water if a hurricane was on the path to impact Georgia in 4 days, so 4 days from now? Do I want to get water now, or do I want to wait until the hurricane hits to try to get water? You guessed it, I want water now. So the demand for bottled water right now is going to increase because the likelihood of it being available at a later date is pretty unlikely, right? So therefore, the demand curve is going to shift to the right. And demand for water, or bottled water in this case, will increase. All right, the last one, population, is pretty self-explanatory. If the government passes harsh immigration laws, how would that impact the demand for bread? So the way it's worded, don't let it trick you up. If the government passes harsh immigration laws, if they pass harsh immigration laws, is that making it harder or easier for people to come to the United States? It's making it harder for people to come to the United States. So presumably the population will decrease, or at least not increase at the same pace, right? So therefore your demand curve will decrease because population is less. So therefore your demand curve will shift to the left. All right, so quantity demanded versus demand, change in demand. If the price of a custom cake is $30, what are the two ways that the quantity demanded will equate to two in terms of the two cakes, right? So there's two options. The first of which, one way for the quantity demanded to equate to two is to reduce the price from $30 to $20. So remember, this is a price change. This is not a shifter. Anytime price is the reason that something changes, it's always movement, never a shift. So in this situation, we'll simply move from point A to point B on our demand curve, and we'll reach the quantity of 2. All right, another way for the quantity demanded to equate to 2 is for a non-price related change to occur, such as change in income, consumer preference, related goods, future expectations, or population, the shifters we just talked about, right? So these are non-price related things that cause a change in demand, not change in quantity demanded, but a change in demand where the whole curve shifts either to the right or left. All right, so I hope this video really helped you when it came to demand, more specifically the shifters of demand and the ability to tell the difference between change in demand versus change in quantity demanded. Until next time, peace.